This is as close as I'm allowed to get. Hold on a second. That should be a little bit better. Tucked inside. There we go. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. Excellent, excellent. So last summer, and I don't mean the summer that just passed, I mean the years before summer, we traveled as a congregational trip to Medinat Israel, to the land of Israel. And there were a few people who had been to Israel before, but at least half of the group that had gone had never been to Israel in their life. Now, you may have seen documentaries, you may have seen movies, you may have seen TV shows, you may have talked to Israelis and people who have been there and sat through slideshows. But when I asked them, was Israel like what you imagined? All of them said, no. Totally different, better than they had imagined. How can that be? How could their imagination be so wrong? I mean, were they thinking that Israel was going to be lords of Arabia, sand dunes, and camels? We did ride a camel, I will say, had to have that experience. Were they not expecting the high rises of Tel Aviv? Were they not expecting the beautiful medieval architecture combined with the artist colony of Sfat? What was it that misled their imagination? What preconceived notions did they bring that meant that when they landed in Israel, things looked totally new? I don't want to blame them, because this is something we do continually, constantly. And I'm willing to wager, even those of you who are regular Israel travelers, even those of you who are constantly involved with the land of Israel, either its news, its culture, its people, whatever may be your own particular area of interest, all of us know that we wish for peace for Israel. Hope I don't need to give a show of hands for that. But if I ask you, imagine Israel at peace. Close your eyes. Imagine. What does Israel look like at peace? What does that peace look like for Israel? Are you imagining happy clouds, people singing, everyone together strumming the guitar? What does it look like? Well, let me ask you this. Did anybody here, more than a couple weeks ago, imagine that peace would look like tech transfers, financial deals, military equipment exchanges, strategic alliances against Iran? Because that's the step towards peace that we just saw, taken in the last couple of weeks, as Israel began to normalize relationships with some of the Gulf states, the Persian Gulf states. I have to remember that here in Florida, saying the Gulf states could mean Alabama. And that's a very different Gulf state. But if you had been imagining the innocent peace of the picture of a dove, the olive branch, the people singing Kumbaya, would you have missed the opportunity that came from the peace deal over the last 2 weeks? If you had had your eyes focused entirely on this conception of peace that was latched around the image you had created, would you have missed that chance had you been the Prime Minister or the Cabinet of Israel? Do we miss things because we don't imagine them? Do we fail to achieve things because we can't picture it? And when we picture it, do we often end up going in the wrong direction? One of the most common things that we miss on is if I were to ask you to imagine God, even just saying those words, something flashed through your heads. Something flashed through your heads. Maybe it isn't an image you hold on to. Maybe it's something you saw once in a book. Maybe it's something you saw in a movie, in a TV show. Maybe it was in a comic strip. Maybe it was the way your child's mind conceptualized the reading of Ezekiel, the reading of Isaiah. But somewhere you might have thought, there's a big guy sitting on a big chair. It's shiny and light. There are clouds everywhere. There is God. It is just so amazing. Maybe if you're very classically trained, you would have seen the pillars of purest marble that looked as though they were water frozen in place. Is that God? No, of course not. Because God is not a thing. So how did we end up with these representations? And I don't just mean the representations that have been foisted upon us through the Western culture, which has enjoyed depicting God in physical form. I'm looking at you, Michelangelo, in your Sistine Chapel, beautiful though it is, having left us with this image indelible in our imagination, whether we like it or not. But even within the Torah, and even within the Tanakh, the rest of the Jewish Bible, there are passages which would lead a person to have this imagination of God, to think of God as having a chair. We talk about God's throne, over and over and over again. Why? Why do we speak of God throughout the high holidays as Avinu, as our father or our parent, if we at least want to acknowledge the gender neutrality of that which has no sex to begin with? And we call God Malkeinu, our sovereign. This is not leading us towards imagining God as a king, as a parent. Is this not a stumbling block before the blind for our imagination? This is the dual nature that our faith calls us towards. It asks us to make our minds a blank slate, to remove our imagination of God as a physical representation, to recoil from idolatry, recognizing within it the seeds of corruption. And yet, God needs to be approachable. We need some road towards understanding God. Something that as we are children, as we are young adults, as we are middle-aged, we can at least point ourselves towards an image that can maybe guide us in a constructive way. But how easy it is to get lost in that image. Our ancestors knew of might and glory only as being attached to the kings. That was what they had. If they wanted something that was glorious, the only thing they could point to would be the palace of a king. It's not as though people lived in big mansions. It's not as though people drove luxury sedans. It's not as though there were movie stars or there were athletes that lived in some wonderful splendor. The king was pretty much it. And so if you want people to respect God, if you want people to register to God emotionally the same way they would at least to a human king, you use the term king. If you want people to register towards God as that which is loving, that which is caring, that which is providing, the only example that could be found that would be at least mostly universal would be that of a parent. And so we say, Avinu, our king. So we say, our parent, our king. But this is a double-edged sword. Because if you imagine God as a king, then it becomes very easy to imagine the king is somehow closer to God than you. To imagine that the attachment you have placed on the image of the king works the other direction as well. And so too with Avinu, so too with the throne, so too with any of the anthropomorphism we use for God. It becomes a dangerous, slippery slope. To take the imagery that was meant only as a crutch and have it rebound upon us, and polluting our concept of God and polluting our concept of now, and people, and our word. Think for a moment when we pray towards God. How often is it that we slip in our conception of praying towards God as though we were talking, requesting, putting in a petition to some powerful individual? When you ask God for help, do you frame it any differently than if you were asking your boss for a raise? Are you treating God no differently than you would treat your boss? When you ask God for help in a relationship, are you treating God any differently than you might treat a friend that you're asking to go talk to your spouse on your behalf to help smooth things over? This is the danger. Because what happens then is we put ourselves in a position towards God that is a human-human relationship rather than human-divine. Where we think that our prayers towards God are no different than our conversations with each other. And when I'm talking to you, whether it be here in the congregation, whether it be in a board meeting, whether it be across the Zoom class, whether it be, God willing, together having some nice meal, enjoying our Kiddush luncheon, we are equals. And I can put my opinion on the table, and you can put your opinion on the table, and we wrestle with it and argue with it, and we laugh about it. We do all the good things that Jewish people do. Just more so than other people. But is that the relationship with God? If I tell you I want sports team A to win the Super Bowl, God willing, there'll be one. That's perfectly fine. If I tell God I want sports team A to win the Super Bowl, is it the same request? Am I telling God what to do? Am I using my imagination of God as being something so close to human that it allows me to have the audacity, the chutzpah, the arrogance to tell God what outcome He should arrange? Because clearly the God I imagine also must support the same team as me. Because how could a righteous God not be in favor of my team? This is the problem. And it's not just about sports teams. If I ask God for that raise, if I ask God for that promotion, does that mean I am telling God that my coworker who also wants a raise, who also wants a promotion, that God should smite his hopes? God should dash his dreams, because I am surely more righteous and worthy than he. And if God doesn't recognize that, well, what kind of God is that? When I tell you that I should get the promotion rather than my coworker, you have no reason to argue with me, unless you know. But you can take my side and we can talk about how unfair things are, and it's perfectly fine. But when I say to God, God, give me this raise, convince my boss to give me this raise, what I'm actually doing is I am saying to God, God, your power is at my beck and call. Because were I God, this is how I would rule. If I could sit on that throne, if I could be the king. Again, we allow what we imagine as our tool for imagining God, we allow that to corrupt our conception of God and thus corrupt our relationship. Because now we have turned ourselves into a petty dictator. We are telling God, we know what's best. We are telling God, if you gave me the power, I would take the power from everyone else. I would make him give me a raise. I would make her fall in love with me. I would make this politician do what I wanted. I would make this company do what I wanted. And then the world would be right. If only God would listen to my prayers and listen to no one else's. This is how easy that misimagination can lead us into a very dark place. So what do we do instead? Do we not pray? Do we not turn to God? Does God not care then? What we have to say, what we have to feel, what we have to think? Of course, God cares, and of course we pray. But how careful we must be, just as careful as we are with our imagination of God, to always remember God is not that which we imagine, and that the imaginings are only meant as an assistance. So too, when we open our mouth and our hearts in prayer, we must be absolutely sure that we are not praying that God gives me the power to dominate those around me, that God gives me the power to decide the fate of this new year. But instead, we pray to God for peace. I may not be able to imagine what that peace will be when it comes. Does that mean that the world should be deprived of that peace for the failing of my imagination? We pray to God for prosperity. I may not be able to imagine the opportunities in my life, my country, and my world for greater riches in the world to come, and the years to come, I may not be able to imagine, but does that mean that because I cannot say it, that I would shackle the world to not have it, to deprive the world of those blessings? No. We pray to God for what we believe God knows this world to want. And how God fulfills that is left to God. Do not pray for your team to win. Do not pray for God to make this person favor you in in your business. Do not pray for this politician to be blessed in victory. Pray instead for the values that God has told us are worthy. Pray for justice. Pray for compassion. Pray for wisdom. Pray for mercy. Pray for understanding among all people. Pray for peace. Keep your eyes open, because the opportunities for all of those and all the other blessings God can give us are always there. If we do not allow our imagination to blind us when we come across them. This new year of 5,781 will have new blessings that we have never seen before, because we stand now at a place we have never stood before. And we will be most unfortunate if we only seek what we already imagine we want. And we will be most blessed if we allow ourselves to be open to what God truly wishes for us and seek it as those core values that God has already taught us to seek. Do not allow your preconceived notions, do not allow your imagination, do not allow the baggage of the year that has passed to keep you from this blessing. Open yourself to what God is offering. You will find that 5781 will be better than 5780. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.